And I just remember there was another new immigrant student who came in during class, just like me walking in the other day. And then when she walked in, I think the most of what I heard in the entire class was people guessing her gender. Oh, like, do you think that was a boy or girl? Oh, okay, sorry, this makes me so sad. Like they were just like going around and asking, like making fun of her gender. Like I just like regretted so much of like times like this that I like never stood up for like other people and just trying to like live my best life and like trying to be myself.
Please stand back from the doors. Hello, listeners, new and old. Welcome to the What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. If this is your first time listening, this is a podcast featuring conversations about being Asian. In the podcast, you will hear stories, feelings, thoughts, and experiences from Asians around the world. The goal of this podcast is to highlight, amplify, and validate Asian voices worldwide. I'm your host, Kyle. For all the listeners, thank you for listening. And if you want to help make the podcast bigger so the podcast can get more interesting guests on, subscribe to the podcast, share this podcast on your social, tag the podcast on Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod with a screenshot of you listening to the podcast on your phone. And most importantly, follow the podcast on Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod. And if you're an Apple listener, please give the podcast a 5-star rating and a review. And now to today's special guest. She is Jade Wu, or on the internet, she's also known as InspirLang. She is a content creator that I'm very excited to have a conversation with. She is a content creator creating educational content for language learning, specifically Cantonese, Taishanese, and Mandarin. Also, she writes Cantonese language learning textbooks along with designing courses to teach Asian diaspora and people Chinese languages. The most impressive part of all about what she does is that she's doing it as an Asian diaspora. I can't wait to start our conversation and ask her about everything. So now, without further ado, Jade Wu of InspirLang. Hi, Jade. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kyle. Thank you so much for the intro. I am very much flattered by what you said. I was like, oh, this is what I want to read in my biography one day. But yes, I'm so excited to be finally get to your podcast today. And I've been listening to your from your other guest episodes also. So I'm very excited. And also like you said, I've been like interviewing other guests for my Cantonese podcast. So it's like a very different feeling for me today, but I'm very excited to be here today
Well,
finally.
I'm so happy to have you on, and I'm feel so honored just because like I have known of your content for a while, and it's really nice to see because I think for myself, your kind of content I wasn't used to seeing at all when I was growing up and trying to pick up my own heritage language and all that stuff. So having you doing what you do now for those that are in the process of learning the heritage language, I feel really happy about that. And just can you just let the audience
Mhm.
know if they don't know you by now, who you are, what you're about, and most importantly, what kind of Asian are you?
So I will tell you like what my students think of me first. I think when I first started teaching Cantonese, I wasn't thinking about like, all those preserving your heritage, preserving your language, your dialect. I wasn't thinking about any of those, but I just did it. And a lot of my students or like online, fans online, they just describe me as like the OG Cantonese teacher because back then there weren't so many Cantonese material available. And that was exactly why I did it, because I saw that there was a need for it. So I just went ahead and I did it. And so from there, it just became what I do right now. And you asked me like, what kind of Asian am I? I felt like I started thinking about it from like day one of you like asking me to be on to be part of this episode, and I still haven't figured out. But I think, but just like after listening to like all of your other like guest episodes, I was just thinking, I felt like I wasn't as fancy like as what you described, but I was just like a very ordinary Asian, just living her everyday life. But some people are good at certain things, and just it just happened that like my forte is in language teaching, and my forte is in Cantonese teaching, and I just very much love to share that part of me to like the people I know, and now the people I don't know. So yeah, I think that's just nothing too fancy like what you described, but I was flattered.
You're definitely doing something very special, though. I mean, from the far of like content creating to teaching languages to kind of what you do as a whole. So, if you can tell the audience, like specifically what you think you are as a person in terms of your own work, what would you say you are?
What would I say I am? Um, I think from what I think, I think I'll be like I'm a good teacher, and usually a good teacher comes from a very bad student. I think that's what people say. So, and I think constantly I'm looking for ways to become like a better teacher. And when I say better teacher, I just meant like to become like just a better and more sympathetic person. And as a teacher, I'm able to do that because I guess seeing how like my students struggle, and I used to be like a math teacher also, but like now as a Chinese teacher, I see from what I know, and I see how the students struggle and how I can be help to them. And I think from that journey, it reminds me of who I used to be, and when I struggle and when I couldn't speak English and someone stepped up to like teach me and to help me and to help me grow also. And so I think I would from what I think, I like would want to give back to I feel like this is so cheesy, but like I want to give back to like society that like has like invested so much in me also. So yeah, that's what I think. And I want to from what I do, I want to give I don't want to just do what I do, but I want to have like a slightly bigger impact on, just from students, and also from students they grow to like other people that I don't know. But I hope that someone somewhere else can, be impacted by me positively. So that's what kind of Asian I think I am, or I'm trying to be.
That's great. And it seems like for you, your biggest identity would be that you are a teacher. And I think some people might not exactly just see you as that just because of how your branding is online and as a content creator more. But I definitely could see that you're a teacher at heart just by what you're saying and like the stuff you're putting out. Because I think it takes one person just to create content, but it's another person to really like create materials for teaching and all that stuff. And you're doing all that. And I want to get to all those in a bit, but I want to start off from the very beginning. So can you just
Mhm.
let the listeners know like where it all started and like kind of your upbringing and just your family and all that stuff, just
Mhm.
because for those that don't know your story is like you're not
Yes, of
exactly
course.
started off living in America because you're born and raised and all this stuff. Can you just share your kind of immigrant story along the way?
Yeah, of course. Um, I've been waiting for a chance to say that. No one came up to my podcast and interview me for this, so this is great. So I was born and raised in Guangdong, China. Well, specifically Taishan, or how I romanized it as Taishan, or some people call it Hoisan, Taishan. So I was born and raised there, and I went to school there, just like any like just like a very ordinary Taishan, just living there for until I was 13. So when I was in seventh grade. So when I was in seventh grade, my family and I moved to Michigan. So, and then I started my new life there, and then I started going to school there. But very shortly, just like a few months after, my family and I, my parents, they were looking for more, job opportunities because their, language skills, they were not so great with English. So I think, in New York, there's like a huge Chinese population and community. So then they moved here, and then I moved also. So coming to New York, I just, just went to school like everyone else and started my ESL level 1 class, and just everything just started from there. And I just remember going from Michigan, I guess going from China to Michigan and then from Michigan to New York. I just remember that there was so much, I was in so much culture shock. And I mean, I got used to it like very quickly, but then I just noticed these like differences here and there, and then they just lived in me since then. And so when I was in school, I was never into, languages. Never. Like, and then in school, I think what I did best was just math. So it was very stereotypically, but I would tell you like later on, like why this is not a accurate stereotype. But anyways, I did very well in math. And so, just like in college, even I was thinking, I was going to be a statistician, because I was studying statistics. So when I'm done with school, I was just gonna be doing that. But then something happened when I was in college, and nothing like super, not nothing like a big event, but it was actually just like a friend sitting next to me, and he told me he wanted to study Chinese. And I was like, oh, I know Chinese. I can teach you that. And so when I got home that day, I just started, I was like, So I just promised him I was going to teach him Chinese, but I was only going to see him once a week during that recitation class. So how am I going to do that? So that was when I started going online and searching, oh, how do I create a website? Or maybe how do I do videos? But I think I knew how to edit like very simple videos at that point because I love singing and I love doing covers with my friend. So song covers. So that's how I started teaching Chinese to that person. And then later on from him, I started being less shy about telling more friends that, oh, you want to learn Chinese? I actually started doing that. And it was very interesting also because at that time, so it would be like 2015, 2016, there were basically like, I mean, not no Cantonese learning material for English speakers, but very limited. And so I looked up, I couldn't even find Yupeng, which is like a Cantonese romanization system. I can't even find that. And so I think there was this little seed planted in my head that, you know what, there's a need for it. And I tried to look up for it to it. And then I asked my friends in Hong Kong who study Chinese, and you didn't know that. So I was like so desperate. Like, how come no one knew about this? So I just went ahead and I did a lot of research about it. And so from that point, that's when I knew like maybe one day I'll do something to expand this Cantonese desert for now. But that's how I started. And I like got and it stretched to the podcast also. And the podcasts were even funnier because, a lot of people would complain that, oh, Jade, like they didn't say Jade, but like the earlier episodes on InspirLang's like Learn Cantonese Daily Podcast needs to be redone because there's so much reverb and there's so much like noise or echo, whatever. And I just laughed because that wasn't something I was ready to share to the world at that time. I was in college and I literally physically recorded in my college hallway. So like in between classes, there was these like hours of gap time. I was like, you know what? I don't want to look at numbers for now. So let me just do something for fun. So that was how I started from, this is my journey from, sort of middle school to college. I am very long-winded. You can ask me any questions you have, Kyle.
Oh no, it's great. It's just so nice to hear about your kind of upbringing and the journey that it took
Mhm.
from you coming to America to you actually starting to teach Chinese. But I just wanted to ask, like,
Mhm.
why were you like so gung ho about like, oh, let's look for these materials for that one friend to teach that friend Chinese? Because I think if you're like, oh, you want to help a friend out to help them with like
Mhm.
learning Chinese, you'll just be like, oh yeah, I'll just casually teach them whatever I know and whatever he asked about, and that's it. But for you,
Right.
you went to actually like doing research, planning, lesson planning, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Like, what prompted you to do that, or were you kind of already thinking about like, oh, I want to be like a teacher of any sort, because you were saying you were gonna be majoring in stats, so were you planning to be like a stats teacher? That's why you already kind of had that kind of teaching mindset, or was it something else?
Um, oh, it was something else, but I actually did stick with stats, and like that's what I study all the way. But I think when I first came to the US, I guess in Michigan, I think in Michigan when I was first there, and my friends, oh, I was the first Chinese student ever like in that school, like historically. So it's like a very small town. So when I went there, and people were so nice, and like I was like so popular, but like not for what anything I did. It was just because I was so different. And so people just like, when classmates or like the other people from school, they would just like surrounded me and
So
like
everyone tried
asked
to say hi to you.
Yes, they like bombarded me with questions. I loved it though. I couldn't answer them, but I have a little helper who also happened to be Asian, who was also like, born in the States, but she was helping me. And so she was helping me to answer some of the questions. I could understand a little bit, like, oh, what's her name? Like, where's she from? Things like that. It was a very interesting experience. Like, you're like an alien. So that's how I started. Like I was and I remember in seventh grade, there was everyone else was studying like Silk Road, and I like some part of Chinese history, and they were asking, and then my classmates, they were so like excited to ask me questions like, oh, what were your habits, like study habits in China, blah blah blah, some of those questions. And from there, I see like these like curiosities in other people, like other friends' eyes, and that make me feel very like warmed by them. And then coming to New York, it was like such a big plot twist, because in New York, when I, like I described before, in Michigan, I was like, it was very welcoming to like a new immigrant. But then in New York, it was like a totally different story. And when I walked into like my classroom in New York City, oh, specifically, and I think I was waiting for the same response. I was like, I'm gonna see how the other people react to this new princess in town. But when I was in class, and I just, at that point, my English got has gotten a little better already, and so I still couldn't like talk fluently, but like speak fluently, but like I can like understand here and there. And the first thing I hear was, oh, another Chinese. So there was such a huge contrast from like what I saw from just like the different places in the States that I went to. And so I think from that point, I was very self conscious about, because hiding myself or like hiding my identity, and like, oh, maybe I will not let other people know that I'm Chinese. Maybe like I'll just, I'll try to blend in, I would try to assimilate. I'll try if like, because like when you learn English, pronunciation is like the hardest part. I mean, like grammar is hard too, but like pronunciation is hard because there's so many exceptions, and like yeah, just many exceptions. So it's very hard to like to speak like a native person just in general, and especially when like I was 13, 14, and I already like spoke Chinese fluently, so it was even harder. So for that reason, I think I worked extra hard on my pronunciation, so that I'm just gonna try to like not let people know that I was Chinese, or like I was whoever I was anyways. So I think, so when I finally got to college, I think at that point, I I was working so hard to, during my previous years, that I was trying to hide myself. And at that point, I think all of the hidden truth is trying to release itself. And so when there was a friend who wanted to learn Chinese, I was just very eager about it to like share. But even before then, I did some Cantonese like learning material for Mandarin speakers. I posted them on like Chinese websites and people loved it. And so I thought, oh, maybe I can just do the same thing. And those are people that I didn't know, like they're just on the website. So I thought maybe I'll do something, like I live in the States, so I can share it to like my friends who live here, and that'd be helpful. And I thought it'd be fun to do. And all I was like thinking about was how to be fun. I like that was literally what I was thinking. So nothing too fancy like what you would describe me as today. But at that time I was only looking forward to like teach that one friend. And yeah, and I don't know why. Because I promised him I was going to teach him, and I didn't want to just promise and then next week just teach him like one phrase that he's going to forget because he's not going to remember. So I think that's a really big reason of why I kept the podcasts, because they're good for, if you want to repeat, and it's a place for me to store the material. And yeah, that's how I promised, and I
Yeah,
try to, try to, do whatever to make that happen.
that's great. And it seems like your kind of like gung ho-ness about like teaching that one friend no Chinese was just the fact of like you want to no embrace who you really are after hiding it for during your high school years
Yeah.
especially. And
Yeah.
when you were able to do that, did you feel like it was kind of like a weight off your shoulders? Because I think for a lot of other Asians, especially in the diaspora, is like hiding a part of yourself just because you know that people for most part won't
Yeah.
accept you for who you are is very
Right.
heavy. So
Right.
during those times when you were hiding yourself, how extreme or how bad did it get where like you really can like think of a moment where it's like, oh, why am I hiding so much kind of thing?
So when you asked me to be on this podcast, I actually found my journal. I was gonna read
Oh,
it. I wasn't gonna read it, but I found my journal from 13. So I
wow.
was like, I was reading some part of it, and I guess like reading it just makes me want to cry.
Oh,
And it makes me want to cry now. That I felt like, wow, this is such a like pathetic little girl trying to survive in school. And I think for the most part, I think what I was doing is that like I was not, when I try to hide, I didn't like hide in the corner. I think what I meant by that is that I used other areas that I was better at, and I only show people those facets of me instead of, showing both sides of me. I I'll show them like what I'm good at, for example. And for example, like in school, I think what I felt most like what I regretted most about these days were, I think, when I was like in middle school, high school, and I never stood up for other immigrant students, even though at that point I think I was a very fast learner for like for English only, don't get me wrong, like for English. And I just remember there was this one moment of like when immigrant Chinese students, when they first came to the States, a lot of girls, for example, they would have very short hair, including myself, because that was the policy, that was the school policy. You had to cut your hair really short, and when I walk on the street and people thought I was a boy, which is whatever. And I just remember there was another new immigrant student who came in during class, just like me walking in the other day. And then when she walked in, I think the most of what I heard in the entire class was people guessing her gender. Oh, like, do you think that was a boy or girl? Oh, okay, sorry. This makes me so sad. Like, they were just like going around and asking, like making fun of her gender. Okay, sorry. Maybe we
it's
can
okay.
cut this out. But yeah, I was like, that's like so mean, and like I just like regretted so much of like times like this that I like never stood up for like other people, and just trying to like like live my best life and like trying to be myself. So oh my gosh. Okay, anyway, so So yeah, that's like one of like big moments that I had, and like I mean they weren't like big for me, but like it had a huge impact on me, and so I like if I would to I don't know if I can have a chance to do it again, if I would like stand up for it, but like anyways, I think I would definitely educate like my children to never do that. So
I
anyways,
mean, it's tough when you're like 13, 14, when you just kind of
yeah,
got used to everything. And now it's like you're encountered with a situation where it might
right, right,
affect
right,
your standing of where you work
right.
so hard to get to. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think as a child, like you don't know how to best handle it. But now that you're
Mm-hmm.
an adult, you've seen things, you experience things. Now you can have a like, looking back, like, oh yeah, I should have done something different.
Mm-hmm.
But then for you as a
Right.
kid, I think you did the best you could. And if you didn't care about it at all back then, that's a lie. Because if it was, then you wouldn't have such deep thoughts about it now that you're getting emotional about it. And I think it speaks to the fact that, immigrating to a new country is hard for anyone, especially when are already kind of mature. You already know a bit of things around the world, and you hear things, you see things, and you see what
Right.
things could be like for other people if they don't stay in their lane or like stay status quo. Like for me,
Right.
like I don't have that kind of experience just because I immigrated to the West when I was 5. So
Mm-hmm.
your
Right.
experience of like immigrating when you're in your teenage years is entirely different from my experience.
Right.
And I think it's even harder because you already have a certain kind of cultural makeup, kind of cultural understanding you're
Mm-hmm.
bringing from the East. But for me, I kind of almost have a clean slate, but I still felt kind of had a difficult time adjusting and all. But now that I feel removed from like that kind of a whole experience, I feel like it's a part of
Mm-hmm.
life. It's just something that we
Right.
encounter, and it makes us
Right.
we are, and we should be happy that, like, we experience what we experience and we can learn from it. And
Right.
just one more question about your kind of immigrant experience
Uh-huh.
or like your story before we move on to other things that I find really interesting about you, which is what do you think like your experience like as a person who immigrated to the West at an older age, like the pros and cons of it. Like for me, I immigrated so
Mm-hmm.
young that
Mm-hmm.
I could
Right.
say there are a few cons, but then for you, you will feel it more because you kind of can think of those things as
Right.
almost an adult. So, what would be like the
Mm-hmm.
pros and cons if you have to think about immigrating at your
Uh-huh.
age at 13?
Yeah. Oh, I would talk about like the pros first because that's what everyone sees. I will I guess I would confirm whether they're like the true stereotypes for like a teenager moving to the city. Of course, that's only applied to myself, um but I lived in that circle for so many years. I still live in it, so I can tell enough of that. And I think the one of the pros that everyone sees is that your ability to to speak the language, to speak both languages, and for you to maneuver or like jump in between those two cultures. It's actually really good, like really great benefits to have. So even like when you write, you can when I write, I can write about both cultures, and I can compare them, and I can do it without being too self-conscious whether they were, is that right? Is that true? I've never lived in that, but that's, I've lived in both of them. So, that's like a really the huge pro that I can relate to the language part and the culture part. And also it gives me a lot of advantages for when it comes to like job hunting, for example. Just like be like lived in having lived in two cultures and more languages you speak, it helps you to like see the world in different ways, or like to and every job task in different perspectives also. So for those reasons, these are great benefits to have. And even though you mentioned that you came at like you came to Canada and then earlier,
Yeah.
like a very
Hmm.
early age. It still helped. I'm sure it has helped you in that way too. Being able to say "咖喱鱼蛋," the curry fish ball and dim
Hmm.
sum in your bag. So these are great things to have. But I think the cons is that what people don't see is I feel like I never belong to either group completely. And so sometimes I felt like, my American friends would think that okay, like like a huger part of my identity is being a Chinese. And my Chinese friends think that like you might belong to the American group better because you're not like fully Chinese. So I'll give you like a very, I guess, trivial example, but these are things that would I live with every day. But yesterday, I just had hot pot with a couple Chinese friends, and then and I don't know if you're familiar with this brand called Hai Di Lao.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah.
for have you heard of it, right?
Hmm.
So I have heard of it for years, but I never had it like until yesterday. So yesterday I went with my friends, and we were like talking, and I told her that this is my first time finally having Hai Di Lao, and she was in shock. She was like, "Oh my god, I never never knew any like Chinese speaking person who has never had Hai Di Lao before." Okay, now do your do your subtract now. But when I heard it, I just joked with it, but this is like a great example that
Mm. The
Chinese friends
expectations.
expect me to like know. Like if I don't, then you are like like outlier, like not completely, but like a little bit. And so these examples, and obviously like I have like examples like this growing up with my American friends also, when they have like talk about pop cultures, and that's something would never, I don't think I will ever talk about celebrities like they do, or like know just the pop culture the way they did. And just because I lived in a very different, I feel like it was like a Venn diagram. I felt like I was in the middle, but that there's when the Venn diagram has like that little mutual space, right? And then there's like so much in the other circle, and the other circle that I like don't know. And then I'm still learning each day. And even though yesterday I've had Hai Di Lao, so I wouldn't be like made fun of in that way, but like new things would just keep coming up, and like
Hmm.
internet slangs, and I have to like constantly pick them up, and like new stuff or like new trends online that like if I don't, then I'll be like another, I just you'll be another outlier, but which I am so used to right now. But these are things that I little cons that I live with, and for that reason I felt like I never like completely belonged to each group. And as a kid too, I wanted to become a writer as like when I was like a little kid. And I always wanted to write novel. And then after coming to the States, I was like, you would never write a novel. Like your Chinese isn't good enough for you to write a Chinese novel, and your English isn't good enough for you to write an English novel. So I think these are like very self-bullying thoughts that I have, which is not true, but I just don't want to give the wrong impression. But that was what my brain was telling me. And so for that reason, I was like, there has to be a better way to do it. And that was when I like wrote my first book, I guess. I wanted to teach Cantonese, but then I didn't want to teach it like in any other textbooks. Well, for one reason, I can't write like other scholars who have studied this for 40 years, right? Just for obvious reason. And then the other way is that like I wanted to write something more fun and like for myself, and I wanted to create stories around them. And that was why I like wrote the books in that way. I always like create stories, timelines, and like a plot to even just it was a adult learning textbook for languages, and I always just designed it that way because I want to blend in the two culture, and what I thought in the past was my weakness, and I just wanted to use it as like my strength right now. And so it was quite a journey.
You talking about you
Right.
writing your books is a perfect kind of segue to like talking more about your like content creating and entrepreneurial journey. So it started from you first starting teaching your one friend Chinese as like, oh, because I want to just teach him Chinese because I promised him,
Mhm.
and it really let you kind of unleash kind of the thing you kind of hide for most part of your life during
Yeah.
your time in America to like, oh, you find it where it's quite easy for you to able to do it. You're having fun
Mhm.
from doing it, and then to getting you to write books about language learning? Is it where you did the books right away and then you started teaching, or the teaching kind of more people first and then you thought about doing the book? Because
Mm.
you're trying to figure out, oh, what material can I provide for my students
Mhm.
in addition to what I tutored
Right.
them already?
Right. So the books, I never wrote them until much later. And like earlier I said that it was a seed planted. Like I knew something I wanted to do in the future, maybe when I'm 40. Something I was thinking in my head, but I wasn't ready to write it at that time. And then I went to Beijing to study. And after I study, before I study, I wrote like 2 chapters. And when I came back, I like tossed it out. Like meaning I deleted it because after like hearing like so many scholars taught me, and I felt like who is gonna learn like Cantonese from a college student, and who's not even majoring in language studying. So that's like I was like, you know what, this is not what I'm gonna do right now. And I just put it aside and like forget about it because I love my courses. I would love to do it, but I just thought I wasn't qualified to do it at that time. And so fast forward a little bit longer, and then I was in my third year in college, and I think I started to have more friends asking me, Chinese questions. They wanted to, communicate with their parents or say a couple of new phrases to their parents, or sometimes they want to type to their parents, but they weren't able to like type the characters. So, and they asked me like a lot of heritage speakers, they would ask me some reasons of why you say it this way, but not the other way. So it made me very curious to actually study it more. And so I gathered my friends, a few of my friends, and I told them, let's go to a cafe and study every Sunday afternoon. So that would be something I looked forward all week long. Like I just so look forward to my Sunday afternoon where I can go to this cafe and sit with a few friends and, just study Cantonese together. And so that's how I started, the group classes. I didn't even call it a class. I just call it a Cantonese study group. So, like I would lead it and I would prepare like some material for friends to study. And then you know what? I just make it a free group for everyone else who wants to join. And so I just like post it online. Obviously, like no one knows because like InspirLang wasn't anywhere. So, but my friends knew. So, like my friends who wanted to learn it, they brought friends over. So they came and then we studied together and it was fun and ran for like a year long. And that was like the best decision I did ever. And I just mainly did it for fun, but it was helpful for other people. And I guess seeing how my students or aka my friends progressed during these study group hours, it just makes me really happy. And I have students at that time also when I do like some tutoring, and when I hear them talk about how it helped to bond them and their parents together, it just makes me like so happy. And I have this student who like never did her homework. Like I knew, like I assigned homework and she never studied, never did her homework. And at first I was like a little disappointed. I think it's very inevitable. Like you feel like, oh, I put in so much work. Like, how come you like don't do anything, right? So that was like my mindset at that time. But I think one day she was like texted me and told me that, oh, her dad and they just had like the best moment ever where she was holding my transcript and she was reading it off the Cantonese romanization, and the dad was reading off the Chinese characters, so they're reading together so that he could help her to better like to improve her Cantonese. And so they just bond that way. And to me, that was enough. Like, you don't need to get fluent in Cantonese. I mean, I think sometimes we like look at the end result, too much that, we forget that actually the progress were like it's pretty can be fun. And I think that's what we can learn most from it. Like I just want them to enjoy learning Cantonese, and not everyone is going to learn how to write Chinese characters, like who came to my class, and not everyone is going to speak fluently. And some people don't even have anyone to practice with, but they just want to do it for fun, and that's okay. So I'm to like totally encourage that to like my friends slash students.
Thank you so much for this conversation. And for people that are listening and watching, where can they find you?
Oh, okay. So right now I just have like 3 official social media accounts. So Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you find InspirLang, you will be able to find me through all of them. My website, inspirlang.com.